You know the Spice Girls song, When Two Becomes One? Well, guess what, ladies and gents? The WRU have come out with their own song, and it's When Four Become Three. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the Chip Over the Top Rugby podcast. My name is Ryan. If you are new here, welcome. If you've been here before, welcome back. I know it's been a while since I last uploaded a video. In fact, 15th of September was when I last uploaded a video. Let me just get the Welsh Dragon on show there. Idrai Goch in the corner. So yeah, I know it's been a while since I last uploaded a video, and I thought that I would be a bit more frequent in terms of uploading and just staying on top of things. But life has sort of got back on track and back into routine. I'm back to work, so the commute is extensive back in university. But you know what? I thought, nah, my voice needs to be heard in terms of Welsh rugby, because as we know, things have been pretty complicated and complex over the past couple of months. Initially with the WRU planning to cut from 4 to 2, or like having the 4/5 proposed methods. Obviously we know now that the consultation period has finished, and as of yesterday the WRU announced that by 2028 they plan to go from 4 to 3. There needs to be a team in the west, a team centrally, and a team in the east. And obviously the only team in the east currently is Newport Gwent Dragons. Centrally is obviously going to be Cardiff, and then that leaves the Ospreys and Scarlets sort of battling it out for the one license in the west, which also leads me to question, what about the north? And a few people have come out and said that, because you are missing sort of that population of Welsh people out as well. You can't exactly expect Wales to be divided into 3 and have, you know, people in Carnarvon, say, supporting the team in the west and people over in Wrexham supporting the Dragons. It's just not going to work like that. You are missing out on a huge population of Wales that do play and support Welsh rugby. So, what is my opinion on that? I think it's a bit unfair. I've always personally said that, you know, I think if it does come down to going from 4 to 3, that in the end it will be a toss-up between the Ospreys and the Scarlets. Now, in terms of that, you know, Ospreys have been the most successful team, but if you lose the Ospreys, Swansea personally will not suffer because they have Swansea football. Now, does that mean that you're going to lose sort of those Osprey supporters, and will they go and support the Scarlets and vice versa? Because really, Ospreys was the only team in the West that became formulated from 2, you know, Neath and Swansea. And obviously Scarlets just became an elite tier of Llanelli, which is no longer about. So if you lose the Scarlets completely, Llanelli on the whole sort of loses its Welsh rugby identity, which I think is a bit unfair, a bit harsh. But then ultimately you also potentially lose the Neath and Swansea aspect. Does that mean they go back into the SRC? Does that mean they go back into the Welsh Prem? These are questions that I think need to be asked and ultimately answered. But by me, that's not something I'm prepared to do. Now, the WRU also did, you know, when they mentioned about, you know, ultimately going from 4 to 3 teams and there only being 3 licenses available, they also mentioned that they do want a professional Welsh women's setup, but they also want to have a Welsh women's domestic league of 4 teams. Currently there are 2, the Gwalia Lightning and Brithonia Thunder. Let me just pull up what else they said as well quickly. But yeah, let me know your thoughts on that below, because obviously I've been back now in Wales, and you know, when I was full-time, I say full-time, when I was ultimately a full-time sort of podcast, so I was putting out, you know, weekly content. I was more actively involved in the Welsh game, but yeah, and I think ultimately it's a bit unfair, you know. on Steve Tandy as well, because this announcement sort of just came after he, announced the autumn squad, which I'm going to do a quick separate video on. But ultimately, then you've got those players going into camp thinking, hang on, in 3 years' time, potentially, we might not be playing sort of week in, week out, and we might have to look further afield. And should we wait until 3 years time down the line, or should we start looking now? Which ultimately, you're sort of potentially losing Welsh talent. It's already been there's an article that came out saying Jack Morgan was potentially being looked at by the Saracens. So we've got to sort of think long term about that. Now, speaking of that news as well, I was actually at the Dragons derby game against Cardiff last Friday, and surprisingly, the atmosphere was pretty good. Obviously, I know the Dragons didn't win. Cardiff did come out on top on that game, but the atmosphere there, the attendance was good, considering it was a derby game. It almost looked like a sellout. Obviously, there was a few spare seats and a few spare tickets when I looked, and I went and I just paid on the gate for a standing terrace. But I think ultimately, that needs to be looked at. You've got to look over the next couple of years, because ultimately WRU want to get to this resolution as quick as possible. Parc Scarlets, I don't think I've ever seen it full. And obviously now the Ospreys are currently in development of St. Helens and trying to build that stadium up for that. So you've got to, it's difficult. It's a difficult position to be in. Ultimately, I think they've sort of said, yeah, one of you's got to go, or there's a merger, but I don't think a merger would be the way forward. And then ultimately, again, as I've said, you're leaving out North Wales, which I think is a bit unfair, because when I go to North Wales and I'm seeing, that there's a good couple of leagues, there's quite a few teams up in North Wales, and that's, obviously you've got the RGC up there as well, but there's no professional sports really in North Wales except Wrexham football. And so ultimately you're sort of denying the opportunity for those fans, because they're not going to travel down, week in, week out to watch the Ospreys or Scarlets or Cardiff or the Dragons play rugby. That's just something that, I don't think they will do. They'll probably go elsewhere. Again, let me know your thoughts on that below. And I did actually have a great conversation with an old friend of mine, because ultimately the WRU want the 3 teams in the URC, and I think that is where the issue lies. I think based on what we've seen, Irish rugby's not really in a sort of a sticky situation. Scottish rugby's not really in a sticky situation. They've got it all sorted. It is financially Wales and England are at a sort of a bridging point. And I think ultimately what we discussed was there is a sort of British league only. You have the 4 Irish teams, 2 Scottish teams, 3 Welsh teams, and 10 English teams formed in this. And then you can have promotion and relegation, because ultimately you do have the tiered system. You have the Championship, you have the Welsh Prem, or the SRC, say, and it sort of gives the opportunity for success. And you sort of negate the financial woes of the English teams and also the Welsh teams. But will people fall for that and want that? And then what about the Italian teams? Well, and the South African teams? Well, ultimately, the WRU, no Welsh fan is really regionally going to go to travel to South Africa, are they? Unless it's an international. I don't know of anybody who's going over to South Africa to watch Cardiff, Dragons, Scarlets, or the Ospreys play over there. It's quite an expensive trip. It's a long trip. So ultimately, do you say South Africa, yeah, goodbye, yes, you've been a welcomed addition, but then if you formulate an Anglo-Welsh, a sort of British league, I think people would prefer to travel to, say, Bath to watch a game, or, as far as Newcastle, because ultimately it's going to be a lot more efficient and cost effective instead of going all the way to South Africa. and you just say, South Africa, yeah, you've got to go back into the rugby sort of championship world and sort of get back into, playing against New Zealand and Australian teams. And then Italy can form into maybe the top 14 or the Pro D2, depending on how that would sit. And I think ultimately, if the Italian teams went there, it would benefit the Italian teams long term. And you would have a good sort of supporter base within the UK then of watching regional Welsh and local rugby. Anyway, that was a bit of a ramble, a bit of a long one, but ultimately I think I said that 3 teams is more than likely going to be the option, but it still feels a bit unfair on North Wales. Anyway, 4 becomes 3. Will ultimately 3 become 2 at this point? Who knows? Because obviously that sort of went out the window ultimately after the consultation period. And I've had quite a few fair chats and discussions, and obviously I want to sort of get back into the world of Welsh rugby podcasting now, and here we are. So I'm an open book, and I'm an open ear for discussion in the comment section. But once again, ladies and gents, welcome back to the Chip Over the Top Rugby podcast. My name is Ryan. If you are new, hit that subscribe button, give this video a thumbs up, and I welcome your comments below, and stay tuned for the next video, which will be coming very soon, on sort of my opinion on the Welsh Autumn Nations squad that Steve Tandy for the very first time has selected, which does look quite promising and exciting. Peace.